me, even hike with me around town. You know that I tend to rush around seeing everything and then settle on something that catches my eye, something that gives me pause. And then I can spend hours there, literally hours, right there, just looking and listening to what I see. That's what happened to me late afternoon one day in a little town in Italy called Assisi. On my first visit there, about the age of 30, I stepped into the Basilica of Santa Chiara, and I found myself gazing at Claire's mummified body in its gilded casket behind glass. She lay there in her black habit, her head wrapped in white, a bunch of plastic lilies in her hands, gazing, it seemed to me, towards some distant place. And some of the frescoes of Claire in the church, I could see a young woman who is truly beautiful. She was not looking at us, at the viewer. She seemed to be exploring some distant image outside of the frame. Perhaps what some would describe as a distant love. Claire had fallen in love with Francis. Maybe it was his wildness, his lack of conformity, his way of seeing different things anybody else seemed to see. Maybe it's because she was looking where he was looking, outside the frame of their lives, seeing the invisible in the visible, and the spiritual in the sensible in the senses. Looking at her body there, I could not think of her, and along with her, the love of her life, Francesco di Assisi. This was a friendship that changed the world, my friends. A love, yes, a romantic love, celibate to the end, that set them on fire and still sets the world on fire with possibilities for love and for relationship. The white-hot flames that were ignited seared them both, even unto sanctity. Since the very dawning of that relationship, the world has probed and probed again the mystery of this friendship, seeking to discover the humanness in it, and at the same time secretly hoping to find an even greater manifestation of the divine. Francis and Claire did not disappoint. The purity of their mutual affection and devotion, founded as it was on unshakable loyalty and faithfulness to their Lord and to each other, was never tarnished by the weakness of our human condition, but rather polished it into its own beautiful shining. Francis was consumed with a vision of total love for Christ and total surrender to his way. For Francis, everything else in the world became an opening. Everything in this universe became, including the cosmos, the night sky, everything became an opening into that way. Radical simplicity, what he would call poverty, Lady Poverty, radical simplicity became his way to God. In the company of that radical simplicity, Francis found freedom, and he found joy, and he found peace. When Claire heard Francis preach of his own unique happiness, his fiery words touched the soul of Claire, her own soul, and kindled a like vision in her. She pursued that vision with all the directness and clarity of her nature. When Claire joined Francis and his brotherhood as his first companions in the ruins of an old convent that Francis himself had rebuilt, called San Damiano, she knew she was discovering the purpose for which she was created. You know, discovering the purpose for which you were created is a source of tremendous joy. And if you're given to expressing that joy, you find yourself singing spontaneously, even dancing wildly, even in the streets of your own city. The staid, the serious, the repressed would call that madness. For others, perhaps, you could call it sainthood. The power of this spiritual friendship reaches from the 13th century to the 21st century, to us right here today, here at home today. It reaches all that way to us, and it gives us pause if we're listening to the story of their love. Any of us who have ever dared love, and any of us who've ever fallen into romantic love, it gives us pause, a chance to look again at these relationships in our lives that mean so much to us, at their intensities, at the intensity of love there, wondering if perhaps there's something we could learn from these two. One of her biographers wrote, "This medieval nun was simply a light with love, a hidden flame glowing inside and alongside and beside the ardent poor man of Assisi, and so like him that their names are inseparably linked in history." Clare understood Francis as lovers do. Clare understood him and his work perhaps more than anyone else. He went to her again and again for advice over the years of his mission. Clare called Francis the charioteer of her soul. Definitely medieval imagery, right? But perhaps in other words, he was her father, and he was her mother, and he was her best friend. Francis must have known how this beautiful young woman with the golden hair felt about him. He must have wondered how he was going to handle what was happening inside of her and also inside of him. How was he going to put this together? She would be the first woman to believe and to follow his dream of a radically simple life and littleness that God had given Francis for the rebuilding of his kingdom. She was in love. She was in love and her heart rushing to begin loving. The magic elixir was what was built in from the beginning. Restraint. We, in our age, most all of us, do not really welcome restraint inside a powerful relationship, but maybe that's part of what makes it powerful. Francis and Clare knew that true love involves a measure of restraint. They inspired each other, you see. They inspired one another towards a deeper commitment to God. Their intense desire for each other alerted them to something beyond this world. It alerted them to the existence of other realities in this world. It's a fragile moment when we fall in love. If you've been there, if you answered yes to the gospel question, you know that. It's a very fragile moment, falling in love. This initial intensity, this urgent longing to abide with these feelings for however long they last. But as one couple after another stand here in this very chapel presenting themselves for marriage, it proves that this moment can become a lifetime, a life-determining event. Falling in love. A young man or woman may feel that they have been broadsided by a storm when this wave overtakes them, that they have no skills with learning how to deal with this. As a matter of fact, we older folks who also experience that same initial intensity of falling in love, this reordering of our brains around this new person we just met, we too can be broadsided like in a storm, and we can find we have no skills, or be afraid at least, we have no skills to deal with all this. To deal with it is like dealing with a wild animal. And when two people are experiencing such waves of emotion crashing against them at the same time, both of them at the same time, and in the presence of one another, it too can offer the world a potent elixir. Because the ordinary registers in a different way. Music may be experienced as something painfully beautiful. I remember when I was young, spending hours preparing a mix of music for a girl on cassette tapes that I thought could capture the meaning of our romance. It was hell putting these things together. I'm still no better at IT stuff than I was in those days. It's a time of poetry for so many. It's a time when flowers are a sort of a visual poem. It can be so confusing, led astray by our emotions, feelings, and finding out I, Gary Brown, was having a hard time coming down to earth. No one I know, however celibate he or she might think themselves, could help but notice a beautiful, beautiful woman or man, such as beautiful like Claire of Assisi, who at the same time as her physical beauty, this blonde Italian, at the same time radiating a certain restraint in her life. I'm telling you, this is an amazing phenomenon in a human being. To see that kind of beauty and see yet a woman or a man who exercises some sort of restraint. This could be like an aphrodisiac, provocative. He must have known he was dealing with no ordinary woman here. Francis knew he was dealing with fire. He must have been conscious of the dangers he was opening himself up to by being close to her. He was already a confessed celibate when he met her. Francis was forced to come to terms then with his own emotions raging within him in his relationship with Lady Claire. I'm sure it was a certain kind of torture for him. It's certainly been that for me over the years. A certain kind of torture. No matter how well, or no matter the strength of his will, rather, for chastity, for celibacy, trying to figure out what he was feeling, questioning his dream and his direction, he would have asked himself whether he possessed the courage to maintain his vows. As one of his biographers wrote, and I quote, Claire represented the willingness of beauty pressing toward its desired object, the body and mind into one tumultuous act of heartfelt passion. Could he resist? Or was he just another would-be ascetic, concealing his real feelings under his cassock? Here's the key. Two keys, actually. First one. Granted the powerful physical attraction that transpired between these two young people, and for us older people as well, given these powerful physical attractions that look on something altogether different, they were inspired by a mutual desire of a spiritualized love. In other words, they had a passion for a goal beyond the two of them, a spiritualized love. This sounds inconceivable in the rage of emotions and hormones of falling in love, but it's not inconceivable. It was conceived in them, probably in Jesus and Mary of Magdala before them. This can be looked at as crazy, yet she did it, and she did it for love, and their restraint was for love too. It was ennobling, and it brought out the best. This was a true mystical marriage. Today, we may see these acts of restraint as being somewhat extreme, wondering how any self-imposed absence or abstinence might strengthen or deepen a love. It seems to go against the wave. It does. But that would be to miss the point. People like Francis and Claire, they live by different rules than those given any of us, perhaps. Second key. You see, my friends, throughout it all, Claire loved the Lord. She loved the Lord with her whole heart. And Francis was also a part of that love. She did not have trouble sorting that out between the two. had always been associated. Her mind, her love for Francis and her love for God was always associated, not one against the other, but both together, moving towards something else. She did not love God in the abstract. She loved God incarnate in Francis. This is true love. She found God in Francis. And wherever one was, there was the other also. She never thought this feeling in her divided her love. Here lies the secret for all of us to hear. The vow she took was not to Francis. It was to what she found in Francis. In that very human being, she found something very God. And in that God, she was wed in mind and heart to Francis. In that God. Now they were one. She and Francis alike in everything from the dream they shared to the very clothes they wore. She would hold fast to the total poverty, the radical simplicity of this ecstatic moment till the end of her days. Now she and Francis shared everything that mattered to her in life. What greater union can two people have than union in the Lord? What greater union can two people have than union in the Lord? And so she followed him because she loved the treasure he found. She heard him speak of what he had found, and a passage in her own heart opened up. She was Claire and he was Francis, and together they would show the world its hidden heart. The Lord stood between them, and he was transparent. They saw each other even more clearly through him. That's the mystery of a spiritual friendship. We see each other even more clearly through the one who stands between us through our faith. And it all began with Francis and that little Eden of Assisi. That is why she loved Assisi so. Their love began there. The three of them. Francis, Claire, and their Lord. Listen again to the words of the second reading today. They're so beautiful. Paul's letter to the Philippian community. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. I don't think Paul could ever imagine that someday there would be a relationship like Francis and Claire that could bring that home to us so well. Gazing at Claire's body in that gilded cage, I was reminded of the fact that it was as recent as 1850 that her remains were discovered, buried in the solid rock beneath the altar of the church. For 600 years she lay there, sleeping her long sleep. I wonder if she dreamed along those years of the man who inspired her to such a vigilance in the service of the God. When they exhumed her, she was not clutching a bunch of plastic lilies, as she does today. Rather, in her frail hands, so withered and so bird-like now, there was a copy of the monastic rule that Francis himself wrote, carefully prepared for Claire and her sisters to live by. It seems that even in her last breath, this remarkable woman had reached out for what had sustained her most, the knowledge that living a radically simple life with healthy restraint and total surrender were the markers of a complete life. The markers of a completed love. I wish you no less.